Do you practice yoga or are you interested in practicing yoga in the future? Maybe you're a little bit lost. Maybe you go in your yoga studio and you feel it's a gymnastic show that you are definitely not part of. Well, then this episode is just right for you. If you suffer from chronic pain and you try to fix it with stretching, today you really want to know what my guest has to talk about it. I will talk today with Aaron. He has so many years of experience in being a yogi, but also in teaching yoga. He actually hosts a retreat in Costa Rica. He will explain you things that nobody talks about really that much in the yoga industry. And personally, since when I started doing yoga over 10 years ago, I've always felt a little bit suspicious of yoga teachers. And the reason is because they actually need very little effort to get a yoga teacher certification. So if you are like me and would like to know a little bit more of this very ancient practice and you really feel your body tensed, well, definitely you need to listen to this episode. I'm EGR and this is Adulthlete. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
Good, thank you. Nice to be here and talk to you all the way in Germany, I think, right?
Yes, I'm in Germany
Yes.
and it's basically the end of the day. What about you?
No, it's beautiful here. The sun is shining in beautiful Costa Rica.
Wow.
Yeah, and you can
All
see I'm a
right.
little red right now because I was out running this morning and it's a beautiful sun. So I'm like a little flushed right now. A healthy glow.
Yeah, definitely. What time is it?
Right now it is 10:42.
Okay, so you went running and it was already hot,
Yes.
I guess, right?
Yes.
How many degrees?
Right now, well, we speak usually, well, the Celsius, it would probably be like 30, 32.
Wow. And you
Yeah.
went running. Oh gosh.
Yes.
It's quite an achievement, I would say.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So I saw you a lot in your videos. It was pretty interesting, and also we talked a little bit before about your passion for yoga and a little bit about the police of stretching.
The
we
stretching
get
police.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. So we will get into that. But first of all, I'm really curious. I would like to know a little bit more. How did you first get into yoga?
Sure. I was a very active teenager, very sportive, in doing a lot of unusual activities. I went to an all boys boarding school in Canada. So I really was into snowshoeing, dog sledding, canoeing, and then also many other sports. Ice hockey is very popular in Canada, soccer, volleyball. So a very wide range of activities. And I loved it. I thrived in that environment of using my body. I started tightening up and I thought, well, if I want to stay young and healthy and mobile, I should stretch. And so, being a person who doesn't do well, or at that time didn't really do well with doing things on my own, I thought I should go and stretch and take a yoga class. And so I started doing yoga as a way to stretch. And as I got into it, what I, as a side note, this is a kind of an off topic thing, but I really dealt with ADD a lot, attention deficit disorder, still do to some degree. And yoga was one of the only things to really help me. And so I, as I got into yoga, I was able to increase my power of concentration, my sense of focus. I really felt like I was getting inside my body. And so that part of it really attracted me. And there's many different kinds of physical practices of yoga. I was kind of leaning more towards the more challenging ones. I eventually got into what's called Ashtanga yoga, which is a very aggressive 90-minute practice of just really using your body. And so as I got into that, what sort of also started happening simultaneously is I developed back problems. And so I was getting rid of the stiffness, sort of, but the back problems just kept getting worse. And the short story is, and I'm happy to, get into a more detailed story if you want, but the short story is 25 years later of dealing with chronic pain that just got worse and worse. And my lower back wasn't the only place. I started developing chronic pain issues in my neck, my shoulders, my knees, and so
Everywhere.
everywhere. And the more pain I got, the more I stretched. And then I ended up in the hospital 25 years later with an orthopedic surgeon telling me that I probably was going to need a spinal fusion in my lower back because I had developed sciatica so badly and I had developed other issues in my back so badly that for him, one of the only alternatives was likely going to be a spinal fusion. And that kind of moment was a moment of personal reckoning for me as I started to ask the question, what don't I know? And it's a question, by the way, that I think most people are afraid of asking, let alone yoga teachers. And but I had been doing yoga for 25 years at that point to avoid this very situation I ended up in. Like I was doing yoga to avoid, the hospital and this aggressive form of surgery. I have known so many yoga teachers that have had shoulder surgery, knee surgery, hip replacement surgery, and even spinal fusions. It is not pretty. And so I was doing all of this to avoid that situation. And so the big question was, what don't I know? I still believe very much in yoga. I think that we have really perverted what yoga should be about and turned it into literally a circus show or a gymnastic show. And we see these people
Mm.
doing these kind of incredible movements, which are, for all intent and purpose, awe-inspiring. And but then I can turn on the TV and watch the gymnastics, the Olympics, and be awe-inspired as well. Um, but I see a lot of this kind of like leaning towards, this ideal sense of enlightenment equating to how much I can put my foot behind my head or how long I can stand on my hands. And for me, like I had already started changing the way that I thought about yoga by that point a lot. But I was still of the mindset that yoga equated stretching. And so, what kind of precipitated me ending up in the hospital was me doing this very intense sort of, I'm going to call it for now, stretching practice. I can give more information about that, but it was a very intense stretching practice and long holds. And that's kind of what precipitated me getting into the hospital. And so after that, it was like, what don't I know? What is it? What's the missing ingredient? And that's what led me to understanding or endeavoring to have a better understanding of muscle function and how muscles work in the body. And that's what led me to where I am now.
Interesting. So, one of the common reasons why I hear a lot of people going into yoga as adults, maybe like in their 40s and 50s, is about pain. So, it's really interesting. And on one side, I also see a lot of men that don't want to get into yoga. Although, women are more flexible. I have over mobility, so I definitely, with no effort, have to do. I can do a lot of stuff. But
Yeah.
then the thing is like, why am I doing it? And I see men actually have less flexibility. They probably should get into yoga. There's some kind of resistance. I don't know, they feel it's awkward. I don't know. What is your experience as a man?
So I can tell you exactly why men are not into yoga. And this is a little bit of a long conversation. So if I do get long winded, just cut me off and say, Aaron, wrap it up. But so yoga, it's important for people to understand yoga was not a women's thing. Women didn't necessarily do yoga. They were not necessarily the keepers of the tradition. Men were. In fact, more specifically, male Brahmins in the Hindu sort of culture. So women didn't really have anything to do with yoga. Now, were there women that practice yoga? Absolutely. Are there women saints in the Indian tradition? Absolutely. We just don't really talk about them that much, and they were not necessarily the keepers of the tradition per se. Just like we don't have a female pope. It's just not. It's just the same kind of idea. However, in the 90s, sorry, in the 90s, in the 20th century, we started to see this movement of yoga starting to come into the West. And so people who had studied yoga, one of them is Indra Devi. She is probably one of the biggest ones responsible for bringing yoga more to the elite LA crowd in 1950s and 60s. And so we started seeing sprinklings of it. And then we started seeing yoga studios popping up. And they were very kind of like, especially in the West, I don't know about Germany. I don't think so in Germany. It took a while to kind of catch on in Germany. But in the West, especially in the West Coast of the US, we started seeing these granola type yoga studios. You come in, it's like incense wafting. And coming from a Judeo Christian background, that scared the heck out of a lot of people, especially like me. I was like, oh no, this is just too weird, right? But then we started seeing yoga coming into like YMCAs and fitness studios. And what happened was you have these teachers, these female teachers who are teaching exercise classes, keep fit classes, and whatever, aerobic classes. And what do? They put leg warmers on, they wear tights, they wear skimpy little clothes, and they're like, come on, girls, let's get our bodies moving. And so their manager came over to them and said, we really want to do a yoga class because we want to give people an opportunity to stretch. And then these, girls wearing their leg warmers and their leotards didn't know anything about yoga, but then translated what they knew into kind of a yoga class. And I think men saw this and goes, I'm not putting leg warmers on. I'm not putting a leotard on. And that kind of stigma has stuck with it. And the irony of all of this is that yoga is a men's domain. Like it was originally for men. It's for 15,000 years. And all of a sudden, women in leotards and leg warmers have kind of hijacked it. I'm completely joking, by the way. But objectively, I mean, that's kind of like if you zoom out, that's what you see. And so that's kind of one of my explanations about why men are scared of it, per se. And so to kind of counteract that, what we've started to see a lot of is more aggressive forms of yoga where there's no oming, there's no incense, there's no chanting, there's not even breathing. It's just, let's just do postures. And then you get teachers that come in and say things like, we're going to kick this practice. We're going to, turn up the temperature. And so there's these more aggressive forms. And that I think has attracted a lot more men, especially in the West. You actually see in a lot of yoga studios in LA and San Francisco, kind of a 50-50 mix a lot of times. But the classes are very aggressive.
Hmm. Yeah, I have like a couple of videos that they're very good routines that I keep doing since, I mean, 10 years now. And they're quite old as well at this point. And
Yeah.
the woman is like saying, yeah, let's burn this sugar. We don't really want to have this. Like all those things doesn't make sense. What
That's
is that?
hilarious.
Let's stretch, that let's make those segments, and it just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. The routine per se is amazing, but then the things she says are completely westernized. Like, who
Yeah.
cares in India about, this kind of details? It's just something you say at the gym,
Yeah.
just some
Well, and
workout.
what is really sad, because I've been traveling to India for like 15 years, 20 years. And what I've started to see, I was just fact checking myself. It's over 20 years now. I've been going to India. And when I first went to India 20 years ago, you didn't see a yoga studio in Delhi, really. Like, it just didn't happen. You learned yoga from sort of the family teacher, if you will, who would come to you and give you mantras or give you some asanas. And usually it was tied into your health. Um, and then the last time I was in India in 2015 was the last time I was there. I was shocked to see how many yoga studios have popped up. And now it's like much more than that. I've talked to several friends who have been there. I'm actually going there next year. I'm leading a group of people there in September next year. And it's become very westernized. It's more like, for a lot of especially more affluent Indians, it's become more about, oh, how much weight can you lose? How, in shape can you get?
Hmm.
And it's really kind of sad in some ways to see that evolution. On the flip side of that, you know, I think that we can also say, two things can be true at the same time. I really believe that it's also true that this is actually starting to get yoga more out there. It's starting to reach more people. And I think that's a very positive thing. And so what people do with it, like, you've been doing yoga for a long time, and I think from the little that I know about you, it's kind of propelled you to ask more questions, to seek more knowledge. And I think those are really positive things. And I think that, whatever yoga we're doing will prompt us in our own evolutionary process. So as much as I joke about it and kind of get a little upset sometimes with the yoga being offered out there, I'm also equally happy to see people making the effort and getting, as Brian Kest would say, getting their ass to yoga class.
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, I was in Bangalore and in June, and there was, I think, exactly that week a yoga day. There was inside my hotel. I didn't go. It was 7 a.m. I was like there for work, so definitely didn't have time. But they organized some yoga class, and then I was talking with someone from my team, someone in India, and they said, "Oh yeah, yeah, he went to this huge event with a lot of people doing yoga all together." And
Yeah,
honestly, it just looked like any event we could have in Europe or North
sure.
America. Nothing's changed, but they probably didn't have it like that in the past, so they did
No.
change.
No, and I think just for your listeners listening, it's worthwhile mentioning that Prime Minister Modi has been a huge instrument of that change and bringing yoga more into the Indian consciousness. So, and I think that's a very positive thing. Even I look at India and I see, on one hand, this very connected deep connection to the tradition. On the flip side of that, I see a lot of the opposite. And so, especially when it comes to yoga, and yoga is a big part of that tradition, and it's a blessing to see more people doing it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, talking about, westernizing yoga and all these different things that we experience, when I started doing yoga, I was really like to get better physically. But on the other side, there is also the spiritual part. So sometimes I'm not sure if I want to do this chanting thing or the music. Like, I'm not against, but for example, I had a friend, she never did yoga, and has anybody, they start because they have sedentary issues and they have back problems. So she was like, "Oh yeah, I found a course. I've started doing yoga." And after some time, I was talking to her and I said, "Oh yeah, because I want to do this and that. I don't remember even what exactly." And I asked, "Do you also do something similar in your class?" And she said, "Well, we mostly, meditate and do chanting, whatever." And I'm like, "Okay." And she she didn't really have a flow, and I was wondering, because I can understand if you want to add it on top, like you're very active, you cycle, you run, whatever, and then on top you do that. But if you do it as your only physical activity, I mean, I think it's a problem. It's not going to help you, right?
If
it's
you
not
do
enough.
yoga as your only physical activity, I think that the problem for people, one of the problems is that a lot of people are like, okay, I've done my yoga for the day, I've worked out. And if your yoga, this is just my opinion, if your yoga practice is your workout, we have a problem. Like, you really don't understand what yoga is. Um, and a lot of people will constantly say things like, I got my cardio on today in my yoga class. Yoga is not, even objectively speaking, it's not a cardiovascular workout. Cardiovascular workout is getting your heart rate up to 70% or 80% or 85% of its capacity and maintaining that over an extended period of time. So that's a cardiovascular workout. And if you're getting your heart rate up in a yoga practice, you're not practicing yoga properly. Your heart rate actually should be endeavoring to get to a resting heart rate. That's what should really be going on in your yoga practice. And so just to kind of put a pin in that, or to put a point on that, that let me say it this way. The three things when I lead yoga teacher trainings and I'm teaching teachers how to teach, I always say to them, be very clear about what the lane is that you're driving in. Like, what is your skill set? What is your knowledge? Your knowledge boils down to three things: teaching people how to move safely, and teaching people how to breathe. And the third point, which I think is probably the most important point, is teaching people how to rest or relax. And so you're teaching people those three things. And in a traditional kind of quote unquote Western yoga class. So people that are going to yoga to get their quote unquote workout, it's defeating the practice of what yoga should be, but they're also kind of cheating themselves out of getting a real proper workout. And so, for example, for me, I do several things to stay in shape. I hike, I walk, I walk a lot actually. It's my favorite form of exercise these days. Sometimes I swim. I used to swim more, not so much anymore. And I also go to the gym and I go through different isometric drills and I lift some weights and I do, of course, my muscle activation practices. So a combination of all of that is outside of what I do for yoga.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also what I do, actually, to be honest.
Yes.
As of now, I just found only one sport that is actually giving me all of the things I actually need to feel good, and that is
Yes.
figure skating. Yeah.
Wow.
It has everything in. Unfortunately, I'm not doing it right now because of energy crisis. So they're actually shutting down all the rinks. But that's the only thing. You have rotation, you have cardio. Like, it's like running and then stretching at the same time because you have to reach, the positions. Crazy. Only thing. But if I
Yeah.
just do, let's say, running, I have to integrate something else. If I do one thing, I have to do the other one.
Yeah.
So, but interesting. Um, let's talk a little bit about your t-shirt. So, stop stretching. Like a disclaimer, right?
Let me lift
I
it up just a little bit more.
okay. So I'm telling you, last time I had my personal trainer telling me, you have the fascia in your muscles, they get like some sort of bubbles. So if you do not do enough stretching at the end of your fitness session, whatever, like especially at the gym where you lift weights, then you will have more pain, because I do have a lot of pain. So much that sometimes I cannot sleep during the night. Like if I do a hard session at the gym, it could be that during the night I'm so sore that I cannot rest properly. So now, what's your take on this? Is it muscle activation the solution because I have to activate them to feel less pain?
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a myopic view of it. So let's kind of break it down first of what pain is. So pain is a response to inflammation. You have inflammation in the body, you have more specifically a joint, and that inflammation is stimulating the pain receptor nerves. And so, what do you do to get rid of the pain? You can take pain blockers, you can like aspirin or something. You can also take anti inflammatories. Sometimes your fitness trainer might have suggested to you to do a heat pack or a cold pack or something. And so
Hmm.
there's all of these different things that you can do to get rid of it. So what is why is that inflammation there? Okay. So the inflammation there is there because it boils down to three things: stress, trauma, and overuse. And so what started to happen is that one of those three things is happening. The byproduct of stress is always going to be inflammation. So the question is, why is that joint? Let's just talk about the hips or the lower back. Let's talk about the lower back because a lot of people have lower back issues. Why is there this pain in the lower back? Well, it's because of stress. There's a stress in the joint. Now, maybe it's because certain muscles have been overused. Maybe there's been a trauma there. All of these kind of things play a role. Because there's this stress, the muscles supporting that joint are not working properly. Does that mean that they're weak? And this is a very important distinction. I'm not suggesting you to start lifting weights to get those muscles stronger. That's not what we're talking about here. They're weak at a neuromuscular level. And what does that mean? That means that the messages from the brain are not going to the muscles. For example, like you bend forwards, and as you bend forwards, and you told me before you're pretty flexible, I would suspect that there's a lot of stress in your body that has caused the messaging system to be disrupted between the brain and the muscles. When you bend forward, your brain should be sending a message to all of your trunk flexors, your abdominals, your transverse abdominis, your rectus abdominis, your obliques. It should be sending a message to them as you bend forward: contract, contract, contract. Shorten, shorten, shorten. Remember that muscles move bones and muscles stabilize joints. So if the brain is sending the message to those muscles, the muscles aren't getting those messages. Well, the body, you're moving into a range of motion. Your body has to stabilize you somehow. So now it's relying on your back muscles and maybe even some of your hip muscles. By the way, these muscles have no business doing or participating in that range of motion. They have no business moving the body. Those muscles are supposed to shorten as you come backwards, not forwards. So now they're supposed to stabilize your body as you bend forward, now you're putting stress on all of those muscles. Because the front muscles aren't contracting, the back muscles are becoming overused. You're now creating stress in that back joint. And so part of the problem in the fitness world and especially the yoga world, oh my God, nobody understands muscle function. Nobody understands that as you bend forward, we need to get these muscles working properly. Sorry for your listeners who are listening. We need to get the front of the body's muscles working properly, meaning that they should be shortening, contracting, instead of relying on the back muscles. But because we can't bend forwards, we then automatically say, well, there's a problem because there's tightness in the back. And so now we need to stretch it. And anytime we stretch, we're going to create more stress and more trauma, which means that the messaging system between the brain and the muscles becomes even more compromised. So it's a big spiral. And that's, I was talking about my own pain journey. It didn't happen overnight. Over 25-year period it took, and then I ended up in the hospital in this critical state. um, and you see this, by the way, with people who do stretch a lot, like gymnasts. Gymnasts by the age of 25, 27, they have to tap out, sometimes even earlier than that, 24. You see this with dancers constantly. They struggle to take care of themselves. It's very hard for dancers to have a dancing career past 30,
Yeah.
because their bodies are just so compromised and abused by all of the stretching. And of course, they do more stretching because they're in pain. And the stretching gives them like a momentary relief, like just temporary relief. But once that temporary relief passes, which can sometimes be like 30 minutes, the pain always comes back with the vengeance. So I hope that kind of explained it a little bit. It's not just as simple as like, muscle activation. It's understanding, when we move forward, we want to get these muscles working properly. If we're going backwards, we want to get those back muscles working properly. And all of these muscles do two things. They move bones and stabilize joints. If you remember that, you'll know more than most fitness instructors out there, because they forget that basic truth. Muscles move bones and stabilize joints. And in order to do that, they have to be able to contract. And we define a healthy muscle as a muscle that can contract and contract on demand. And that's a very important point. Like, muscles should be able to respond immediately. If it doesn't respond immediately, it's a weak muscle.
Yeah. I remember I had one teacher. I mean, she was teaching yoga, but it was just a little bit of fusion
Yeah.
with other things. A little bit like your opinion on those things. She was telling me the same stuff. And she said, well, we don't need to do a headstand in real life. What I need is to manage how to get out my baby from the car with a foot in the car, the
Yeah.
other foot outside, and trying to handle like a heavy, this kind of things where you put the baby in. It's super heavy if you take one, and it's a movement that
Yeah.
you don't train in the gym.
Yes.
You train
No.
everything else except what you actually need. And this really made an impression in me years ago. That's why I was always trying to stay away from most yoga studios. I really
Yeah.
have to trust the person, right
Yeah.
now.
And I think like that's a big part of where we should go in the yoga world, is teaching more about functional movement. So when we look at the purpose of asana, which is a huge conversation, much longer than what we've got, but from a functional perspective, or from an asana perspective, we practice asana to get more stability in life, and so that we can be more stable and do the things that we need to do in our life, like lifting our baby from the car, and going grocery shopping, or washing our hair, or being able to look over one shoulder without the fear that my body is going to break down. I'll never forget one time, it was actually about 13 years ago. I was leading a yoga teacher training at Blue Osa. And at this moment, it was right at the very end. It was a month long. So it was like day 28 or something. I was leaving a few days later, like leaving my business and leaving my life for a 3-week vacation. So I was finishing this training, leaving, and I was really stressed and not taking care of myself. And I remember one day towards the end, I demonstrated a pose called Pavrita Bakasana. It's like twisting crow pose. And so you kind of come up and you balance on, you put your body basically on one arm. And I could do it no problem. But I went into it in a stressed out state. I wasn't prepared. My muscular system, my neuromuscular system wasn't working. My muscles weren't contracting and contracting on demand. I didn't, by the way, know any of this at that time. But then next morning, I'm like all giddy and excited because I'm like, I'm going on vacation. And I reached up to grab the shampoo bottle above my head on the shelf, and my whole neck seized up on me.
Ah,
And, it's just a good illustration. I think a lot of your listeners can relate to that having those moments where you sneeze and your back tightens up or spasms. You kind of bend over to pick up the groceries and your knees buckle out. And this is a sign of a weak system, a weak neuromuscular system. And the thing is it doesn't take that much effort to turn that around. Like you can turn it around like that, like at the snap of a finger. It doesn't take that much effort. But what you have to do, stop stretching. Second thing you have to do, take a little time for yourself. Just a few minutes every single day will begin to flip the pain story really quickly. But if you do the muscle activations and then go stretch, you're going to cause more harm than good. So stop stretching, start activating.
uh,
and
yes.
listen to your body. When your body is tight, that's a sign that there's instability. Tightness is a sign of instability. Tightness is a sign of muscle weakness. The absolute wrong thing to do is to try and stretch that tightness out, because you're going to cause more harm than good. So the best thing to do is address the instability, not the tightness. Address like what is not working, because when muscles aren't working properly, the body will always tighten up in response. So that's the way in to deal with that.
I'm just wondering because, like, for everyday folks, how do you know if the gym where you go has, proper yoga teacher? Like, because I'm thinking these 200 hours courses, it's definitely not enough to learn
Yeah.
all those things, right? How we can somehow understand this?
The big problem is that yoga teachers aren't learning this stuff, and that's what I'm on a mission about, is to bring more education into the yoga world. Unfortunately, you're dealing with a lot of kind of like a know-it-all syndrome. Yoga teachers think that they know everything, and so that's kind of what we're up against. And they come up with a lot of pseudoscience. And for the record, I understand it because I was there. Like for 25 years, I thought I knew something about the body. If somebody, and I had people actually saying to me, like, stop stretching, Aaron. Not a lot of people. There was a couple of people. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. And so we just got to keep putting the message out there. Um, so that's part one. Part two, I think the most important thing at this juncture is to educate yourself as a listener. Like, start to understand your body. That's going to empower you more. And by the way, if your listeners remember that fact, muscles move bones and muscles stabilize joints, and they do that by shortening. And so, what does shortening mean? They have to be able to contract in order to do that. Muscles need to shorten, they don't need to lengthen, they need to shorten. And so, we want to get them to the point where they have that ability to contract and contract on demand. If you just remember that, you're already light years ahead of everybody else, because everybody else is like, no, we need to lengthen muscles. And when you ask them why, by the way, they can't really give you an intelligent answer. There's a lot of like weird stuff out there, like this person that you were telling me about earlier with the myofascia. And this has kind of become a buzzword out there. People are
Mm.
talking about fascia and they have no idea what they're talking about. I constantly run up against this all the time. Um, there's a lot of things about fascia, and it's weird. It's just really, really weird. Um, the thing about fascia is that if the fascia is tightening up, it's tightening up in response to protecting the body. The body is in a protective state. And so that's another fact that you kind of have to remember in why do we have muscle tightness? Because the body is protecting itself. The question then is, instead of saying, well, we have to open up the fascia, why is the body tightening up in the first place? Where is the source of the instability? So deal with the instability. If you're telling me that you're in pain, you also said earlier that you love to figure skate, ice skate. Or did you say figure skate or ice skate?
Yeah, figure skate.
Figure skate. So you probably have stretched a lot. You stretch. You're causing a stress on the muscles. The muscles lose their ability to do their job. What's their job? To contract and contract on demand. So you stretch, then you go out on the ice, and now you're ice skating around and doing all of these different ranges of motion without that core stability. And then afterwards, what happens is you start to feel tightness. Your body is like tightening up as a protective mechanism. Instead, start to activate the muscles that you need. Get your hip flexors working, get your hip extensors working, get some of your core muscles working, and that pain will start to not happen anymore. Um, the next thing is, and I'm going to be working on this. This is one of my projects, but is to start creating an Ayama directory so people can go into the Yogi Club and look for certified teachers who are teaching this methodology out there. I actually do have somebody in Germany. I don't remember where in Germany she is. I know it's a big country. Um,
Not
it's
that
like,
big, come on.
do you know that person that's my student? But that's my goal, is to start creating more of an Ayama directory. But just to kind of reiterate that, empower yourself with knowledge, understand basic facts or truisms about the body, and start to work on flipping the script in your own mind so that when you see muscle tightness, you no longer go, oh, we need to stretch that. Instead, go, my body's in a protective state. What's not working properly? And
Mhm.
how do I get that turning back on? So I improve that neuromuscular connection between the brain and the muscles.
You once told me something that was really resonating with me, that it's coming from traditional yoga, from a sutra, that we build our own prison. And I'm thinking, this prison is somehow the pain that we also have, right? And I think many resonate with this, right? The prison we create for ourselves. But let's say you are aware of this. So you already did the homework, because some people are not even self aware. Okay, let's say you did that step. How do you actually get unstuck from your own prison?
So there's a few things that you're kind of asking me, and that, like, so we kind of have to narrow it down. But for your listeners to understand, what I said was that the Yoga Sutras opens up and it says that we humans have this incredible tool at our disposal to do incredible things in life. And that thing that we have at our disposal is the human mind. That no other creature on the planet has anything like the human mind. And with the human mind, we have the ability to go to the moon. We have the ability, they just sent a rocket to Neptune, for God's sakes. Um, I look at somebody like Gandhi, this like barely 5 feet, who freed a nation, and all he had was the power of his mind. Um, and within the power of his mind was his willpower and clarity of sense of purpose. Patanjali also says that we have this human mind that can also create our own imprisonment. The mind is the key to your freedom or the warden of our own prison, our own self created prison. And within our own self created prison, we create our own stories, and our stories are very fictional. I mean, we are masters of creating incredibly fictional stories that just is mind blowing. And instead of, undoing those stories, we actually gather more evidence to make those stories even more true and more solid in our mind. And because of this, most of us are never going to experience freedom. It's actually the goal of yoga is moksha. Moksha means spiritual freedom. And there's a lot to unpack in that statement. So, having said that, can you re-ask your question again?
Yeah, so we started with the prison that we built for
Yes.
ourselves. And I guess some people on different levels, they do know that we actually build those stories in our
Yeah.
mind. But how do you get unstuck? Because even when you know it, it doesn't mean that you are able to get out of that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big conversation. We don't like the very precept of yoga is like one of the ideas is that we don't know what we don't know until we know what we didn't know. And so our practice then is to undo a little bit of what we don't know so that hopefully we know a little bit less or more of what we don't know. And that's a mouthful. And like the Sanskrit word is avidya, and the simple definition of avidya means either there's two definitions, simple definitions. One means without knowledge, that we suffer in life because we don't have knowledge. It also means ignorance. And
Mhm.
so, some of your listeners listening are probably thinking, I'm not ignorant. Well, you know, for your listeners, think about that 16-year-old self, when you were 16 and how you thought you knew everything and that your voice was important and that you should have been heard more. And now I look back at my 16-year-old self and think, oh my God, what an idiot. He should have shut up more. They say children should be seen and not heard. And I think there's a lot of truth to that statement because we just don't know anything, and a lot of what we say is just ridiculous. I mean, you look at these 20 something year olds in the US right now and some of the demonstrations, and I'm like, just shut up.
What are
Um,
you doing?
what are you doing? And so, and I'm sure 20 years from now, most of them are going to look back in complete horror of themselves, going, my God, what was I thinking? I remember when I was 27 thinking about my 16-year-old self and thinking, oh my God, what an idiot. And then when I was like 35, looking back at my 27-year-old self, I was like, oh my God, what an idiot. But that's a video. Like we just don't know. We think we know everything until we realize we don't know anything. And honestly, now that I'm 52, I think that the real wisdom is admitting you don't know anything. And it comes back to that statement I made, what don't I know? Because what we don't know is going to, affect us. And so the trap is our sense of self. We have a sense of self that needs to be protected. And I'll give you like an example of this that I think a lot of your listeners can relate to. Some of your listeners listening are meat eaters, are carnivores, and they go out of their way to prove that to other people. I am a meat eater. Some of your listeners are vegetarians, and they're like, we have to become vegetarian because we have to save the planet, and I'm a good person, therefore I'm going to be a vegetarian to save the planet. Okay, I'm not here to discuss whether you should eat meat or not eat meat. Like, that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that is a source of suffering, that deep seated um, identity, and
It's
to
a
the point where
position.
the position, it's a trap. It
Yeah.
is essentially, it's a trap, this I amness, and the funny thing is, like, with your meat eaters that are listening, and so, like, I'm a meat eater, 20 years from now, some of them will become vegetarian and be like, I can't believe I ever was like that. And some of your vegetarians listening will be 20 years from now meat eaters and going, what an idiot they were. And so this is just a mask, and we wear
Mhm.
masks in life to present an image of ourselves, and we go out of our way. We hurt other people, we join clubs, we join political parties to reaffirm this mask, but it's just a mask. And it's
To be coherent, basically, you have to
yes,
stuck with what you said. But
yes. I mean, I remember, like, there's this very funny controversy going on in the US right now, where this actress from this Broadway show Wicked, who's in the movie, and somebody had created a design where they took away her eyes, and she went on a whole rant about how this person erased her. And it's like, didn't you forget that you're playing a character in a movie, that you're not actually that character? Like, that's not who you are. Like, you're wearing a mask of this person. And but there was, like, such immersion of identity, and we can all objectively look at it, laugh at it, or maybe even identify with her position. But the fact of the matter is that we live that way in life. And until we start to do the work in recognizing the masks that we have, and how much we go out of our way, how much energy we expend, all of our energy in life is to re-edify that mask. And the Bhagavad Gita says it really beautifully. And even, if you're a Christian, Jesus also said the same thing. We have to wear certain roles in life. We have to be fishermen. Jesus was a fisherman of men. Krishna was talking to Arjuna, who was about to go into battle. He's like, you have to go into battle right now. But that's not who you are. Your duty in this moment is to be a warrior. Jesus said your duty right now is to be the farmer or the fisherman. But always remember the source within. Turn your attention again and again back to that source, and identify with the source, not with the doing. And that's one of the affirmations that we repeat. I am not the doer. I am doing, but I am not the doer. And that's one of the ways that we start to get out of this. But it's a practice. You don't just do it once and call it a day. You have to come back to it again and again. That's why, at the truest statement that can be made, is that yoga is a lifelong practice.
true,
And that
absolutely.
is the practice. That is the real practice.
The real practice, yeah. So to wrap it up,
Has it
what's
already
the
been that time?
yeah, we're already over.
It's okay. We're good.
To wrap it up, what's your vision of yoga in the next, let's say, 2 decades, and your role in it?
I mean, I implore with yoga teachers to teach yoga, to really teach yoga, and to understand what it is that they're teaching and why they're teaching it. I always get, one of the biggest questions I get asked constantly is, should I teach this pose? Well, I literally, in this last training I did, I had this one student was in the teacher training, and she was like, "But Aaron, I want to do this pose." And my answer is always the same. Why do you want to teach it? And, if the answer coming back is because it feels good, then you really need to have yourself examined, because just because something feels good doesn't mean you should do it. I mean, a line of cocaine feels good, but that doesn't mean that you should do it. Eating a bowl of chocolate sauce tastes good, but that doesn't mean you should do it. So just because you can do something and it feels good, and this is something that's been very perverted in the spiritual community. A lot of people will constantly say things like, well, if it feels good, we do things because it feels good. Well, that's not a good reason to do something. And then the other answer is, well, because I can do it. And well, just because you can doesn't mean you should either. And so our answer needs to be, something more substantial. How is this going to help me in my own evolutionary process? So when I teach a pose called Superman pose, Shalabhasana, which is like one of my number one favorite poses to teach. I make sure it's in every single yoga class that I teach. Shalabhasana, Superman pose, where you lie on your stomach and you lift your legs off the ground and your chest off the ground as high as you can. This is a fantastic pose because it's activating and engaging all your back muscles. It's even engaging your glutes. And so as we get older in life, a lot of us tend to hunch. And why do we hunch? Because our back muscles are not working properly. They're not activated. They're not strong. So give something to people that is actually going to help them become more functional in life, and help them actually get stronger. I had this student of mine who's 70 years old. Her name is Ginger, and she's actually came and studied with me when she was 60. So 10 years she's been studying, and always like interacting with me. But we haven't seen each other in a long time. And she came into this last teacher training I did, and I remember seeing her the first day going, she hasn't been keeping up so much with her practice because she just couldn't do certain things. And I, in my compassionate way of thinking, I just thought, well, maybe she's just getting older and she's dealing with certain chronic
Mm-mm.
issues. It blew my mind after 2 weeks and watching the visible change in her. Like the very first day, I remember she could barely lift one leg up off the ground and hold it there. By the end, it was no problem. She had, that neuromuscular connection in her was firing. She's going back out into life happier, pain free, and more functional. Those are really three positive things that we want. And so that's what I hope to bring more to the yoga world, is to get yoga teachers excited about bringing those things rather than being excited about how long their students can stand on their hands in handstand or how much they can put their foot behind their head. Let's get people like more functional in their life so they can lift their baby out of the car without the fear of their back spasming or something like
Mm,
that.
absolutely. Aaron, it was a pleasure having you here. It
Thank
was
you.
really enlightening. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It was a delight to speak with you.